For more than 2,000 years, the story of Troy has stood on the uncertain border between history and legend. Millions of people know its name. They know about the mighty walls, the beautiful Helen, the legendary warrior Achilles, and the enormous wooden horse that supposedly brought one of history's greatest cities to its knees. But there is a problem. Almost everything most people know about Troy comes from a poem. Not a historical record, not an inscription carved into stone, not the testimony of an eyewitness, a poem. For centuries, scholars argued that the Trojan War belonged to the same world as the adventures of Hercules or the voyage of Jason and the Argonauts. A powerful story, but nothing more. After all, where was the evidence? No city, no battlefield, no palace. No traces of kings, only verses written by a poet known as Homer. The Iliad, composed sometime around the 8th century BC, tells the story of the final weeks of a war that was already ancient when the poem itself was written. If a conflict had really taken place around the end of the Bronze Age, nearly 400 years separated those events from the earliest surviving version of the story. Is a vast stretch of time, long enough for memory to become legend, long enough for facts to mix with imagination, long enough for ordinary people to become heroes, blessed or cursed by the gods. For generations, historians believed that this was exactly what had happened. They admired the Iliad as one of the greatest works of literature ever created, but few considered it a reliable historical source. Ancient myths often contain fragments of truth, yet they are rarely literal accounts of the past. And so Troy became something unusual. It was perhaps the most famous city in history that no one could prove had ever existed.
Yet one question refused to disappear. Why would such a detailed story survive for so many centuries?
Why did generations of Greeks preserve the names of cities, rivers, mountains, and kings with remarkable consistency? Could an entirely fictional place remain so deeply rooted in collective memory for hundreds of years? Or had a real city inspired the legend? To answer that question, we need to travel back more than 3,000 years to a world that looked very different from our own. This was the Late Bronze Age. Empires ruled the eastern Mediterranean. The Egyptians controlled the Nile Valley. The Hittites dominated much of Anatolia. The Mycenaean kingdoms flourished across mainland Greece. Trade routes connected distant civilizations by both land and sea, carrying copper from Cyprus, tin from Central Asia, amber from Northern Europe, and luxury goods from Egypt and the Near East. The Aegean Sea was not a barrier, it was a highway. Ships crossed its waters every day, transporting merchants, diplomats, soldiers, and ideas. Whoever controlled the narrow sea passages controlled immense wealth. Near one of these strategic waterways stood a rocky hill overlooking the entrance to the Dardanelles, a narrow strait connecting the Aegean Sea to the Sea of Marmara, and beyond it, the Black Sea. Today, the hill is known as Hisarlik. It appears quiet, a peaceful rise surrounded by fields. Nothing about it suggests that it once became one of the most famous places on Earth. Yet its location is extraordinary. From this point, travelers could observe ships moving between continents. Trade from the Black Sea passed through these waters on its way to the Mediterranean. Control this crossing, and you controlled commerce between entire regions. If a wealthy, fortified city had existed here during the Bronze Age, its prosperity would have been no mystery. It would have occupied one of the most valuable strategic positions in the ancient world. But for centuries, nobody imagined that this unremarkable hill concealed anything remarkable. Beneath their feet lay thousands of years of buried history, layer upon layer, hidden beneath the earth. No one knew it then.
No one suspected that an entire lost civilization rested below the surface. And certainly no one imagined that the answer to one of history's greatest mysteries was waiting inside that silent hill. But in the 19th century, one man became convinced that Homer had not invented Troy. He believed the city was real. He believed it could still be found. And unlike almost everyone else, he was willing to risk everything to prove it. History often remembers discoveries. It remembers the moment a forgotten city emerges from the earth, when a hidden tomb is opened, or when a long-lost civilization is finally recognized. What history remembers less often are the people willing to dedicate their entire lives to an idea that almost everyone else considered impossible. The search for Troy began not with an archaeologist. It began with a dream. According to his own memoirs, a young German boy named Heinrich Schliemann received a book about the ancient world as a Christmas gift. Among its illustrations was an image of the burning city of Troy. The picture captured his imagination. He later claimed that at that moment, he made a promise to himself. One day, he would find the lost city. Whether every detail of this childhood story is literally true remains uncertain. Historians have questioned parts of Schliemann's autobiography, noting that he sometimes reshaped his own past into a more dramatic narrative. But there is little doubt that his fascination with Homer became the defining obsession of his life. Unlike many scholars of his time, Schliemann did not see the Iliad merely as poetry. He believed it preserved memories of real events. Not perfect history, not a precise chronicle, but echoes of a forgotten world. To most academics, this idea seemed naive. The Iliad is filled with gods walking among mortals. Athena guides warriors across the battlefield. Apollo spreads plague through the Greek camp. The sea god Poseidon intervenes in battle. How could such a story be treated as history? Yet Schliemann looked beyond the divine interventions. He focused on something else: the geography. Homer described rivers, mountains, coastlines, harbors, cities neighboring Troy. Details that appeared surprisingly consistent. If the poet had invented everything, why did the landscape feel so real? Could mythology have grown around an actual place? By the middle of the 19th century, Schliemann had become enormously wealthy through international trade. Unlike many dreamers, he possessed something essential: money. His fortune gave him a freedom few scholars enjoyed. He no longer needed permission to pursue his obsession. He could finance expeditions himself. He could hire workers. He could buy land. Most importantly, he could search wherever he believed the city might lie. The problem was deciding where to dig. For centuries, travelers had proposed different locations for ancient Troy. Some searched along the coast. Others looked inland. Ancient authors themselves sometimes disagreed. Then Schliemann encountered the work of Frank Calvert, an English expatriate and amateur archaeologist living in the Ottoman Empire. Calvert had spent years studying the landscape of northwestern Anatolia. Unlike most scholars, he believed the low hill, known as Hisarlik, matched many of the geographical clues described in ancient sources. He had already conducted small excavations there and suspected that something significant lay beneath the surface.
but he lacked the financial resources to continue. Schliemann had resources. Calvert had local knowledge. Together, their ideas pointed toward the same hill. In 1870, excavation finally began. At first, the work looked nothing like modern archaeology. Today, excavations proceed slowly. Every layer of soil is documented. Every object is photographed, measured, and recorded. Researchers know that even a handful of seeds or fragments of animal bones can transform our understanding of an ancient society. Schliemann's methods belonged to another era. His goal was simple: reach the legendary city as quickly as possible. Hundreds of laborers dug enormous trenches directly through the mound. Walls were demolished. Upper archaeological layers were removed with astonishing speed. Anything believed to belong to later civilizations was often treated as an obstacle rather than valuable evidence. From a modern perspective, much of this work was catastrophic. Archaeologists now know that Schliemann unintentionally destroyed parts of the very history he hoped to uncover. Entire sections of younger settlements disappeared forever beneath his excavation methods. Yet, despite these mistakes, something extraordinary began to emerge from the earth. Stone walls, massive fortifications, ancient houses, streets, storage rooms, pottery unlike anything seen before. Hisarlik was not an empty hill. It had once been a thriving settlement. As excavation continued, Schliemann became increasingly convinced that he had found the legendary city. Then, in 1873, the discovery that would make headlines around the world changed everything. Hidden within the ruins was a remarkable collection of gold jewelry, silver vessels, bronze weapons, copper objects, and finely crafted ornaments. Schliemann named the find Priam's treasure, after the legendary king of Troy described by Homer. Newspapers celebrated the discovery. To the public, the mystery appeared solved. Troy had been found. The treasure of its king had survived. But reality proved far more complicated. Modern archaeological dating has shown that the treasure is approximately 1,000 years older than the period traditionally associated with the Trojan War. It could not have belonged to King Priam. In fact, the city where Schliemann found it had been destroyed centuries before the events described in the Iliad would likely have taken place. Without realizing it, Schliemann had uncovered something almost as remarkable as Troy itself. He had discovered that beneath the hill were not the remains of one city, but many. The deeper archaeologists looked, the stranger the story became. Each civilization had built its own town upon the ruins of the one before it, generation after generation, century after century. The hill was not hiding a single lost city. It was preserving an entire timeline of human history. The question was no longer whether Troy had existed. The question had become far more difficult. Which Troy was Homer describing?